name of the book is Chosen for Destruction, the story of a Holocaust survivor. And the reason I wrote this book is, first of all, I heard Morris speak, and his story was absolutely riveting. There must have been 600 people in the room and no one moved. So I was so taken by his story that immediately I said, could I write this? But there were other factors involved too. I teach a course in the Holocaust, and his story encompasses much of the various aspects of the Holocaust. He was in a ghetto for 4.5 years. He was on a death train. He went to Auschwitz. He underwent the selection there. He was imprisoned there for about 6 weeks, and then taken to the Dachau camps. There were about 150 camps associated with Dachau. So he experienced much of the various parts of the Holocaust, not all by any means, but he covered a number of the experiences. And he was also involved in the Holocaust from the beginning to the end. His town was, the Germans entered his town within a week after they invaded Poland, and he was liberated right before the armistice, or the end of the war, in May of 1945. So he was involved the entire time. The other reason I was interested in his story is because he was from Poland. And so much of the literature, particularly that's used in schools, is about Western European Jews. Anne Frank, who's from the Netherlands, Elie Wiesel, who is from Hungary, but that's a special case. Even though it's Central Europe, it's a special case because the Hungarian Jews were not involved in the Holocaust until the very last year of the war. Primo Levi. But the students really aren't aware of the fact that the Holocaust, the center of it, was in Poland. And they don't know much about the Polish experience. And this is in part because so few Polish Jews survived. So I was really anxious to write something that would put emphasis on the Polish experience. And of course, he was in Poland most of the entire time. So it was those three things that led me to want to write the book.
I was born and raised in Pabianice, Poland, a town of about 65,000 with a population of about 12,000 Jewish people. I was brought up in an observant Jewish home. I was the youngest in our family. I attended public schools. I was very active in many different sports. I had a very loving and a very caring family, and I had a very, very happy childhood. And all this came to an end at September the 1st, 1939, when Second World War broke out. I was 11 years old. It started with a ghetto. In other words, everything happened like systematically, not all at one time. So first, right after the German army occupied our town, of course, the radios and telephones were confiscated, and we were ordered to surrender all the books. In fact, we had to throw them out through the window, and we were burning them in the streets. And then the ghetto was formed, at which point we were forced to live in a few square blocks in the old city, and we were forced to share our apartments with all the Jewish people who lived outside of those few square blocks. And we were forced to work for the German Nazi machine, producing many, many valuable items. Food was very scarce, and there was only one, not even a doctor, who was like a feldsher, which is not really a doctor. So if somebody got sick, you know, there was no hope, because the Gentile doctor had to come in from outside the ghetto, and the Gestapo did not allow it to happen. So, but what kept us alive and what kept us going is the fact that we were with our families and, of course, our faith. And this also came to an end when the orders came to evacuate the Pabianice Ghetto. Anyway, the children and the sick and the elderly were taken away, never to be seen again. And the rest of us, the able-bodies, were sent into the Lodz Ghetto. Geographically, Lodz was only a few miles away from Pabianice, but Lodz was the second largest city in Poland with a population of 750,000 and almost 250,000 Jewish people. When we came into the Lodz Ghetto, there were only 90,000 left. In the Lodz Ghetto, there were between 300 and 400 people dying every single day from hunger and from disease. Real hunger is almost impossible. And it's a terrible, terrible thing to live through it. It was not unusual in the Lodz Ghetto that when somebody passed, a dear one in a family or a neighbor, they kept the body for 7 or 8 days until the rations come out so they can benefit from the extra food. They could no longer keep up with digging the individual graves, so they were buried in unmarked mass graves. And in spite of the fact that Lodz Ghetto produced an incredible amount of very, very valuable items for the German Nazis, starting with, we had 3 huge metal factories producing all kinds of parts. We didn't know what they were, but whatever the specifications were, we made them. They operated almost day and night. We produced civilian clothes, we produced uniforms, leather goods, furniture, needles, nails. There were like 1,000 young teenage girls working in those 2 factories making straw shoes that they were sent to the Ostfront. At that time, Germany was already at war with Russia. And the German soldiers wore it on top of the boots to prevent the feet from being frozen. And also we produced ski masks and earmuffs, but also was sent to the Eastern Front. So these were very valuable items. And again, what kept us going is the fact that we were still up with our families and our incredible faith. And this too came to an end at the beginning of the summer of 1944, when the orders came to liquidate the Lodz Ghetto, at which point we were thrown into cattle cars, anywhere between 80 and 100 people. I would not even attempt to describe the inhumane conditions in the cattle cars, and we were on our way to Auschwitz. After 5 or 6 days, we arrived at Auschwitz, at which time the men were separated from the women. And my mom and my sisters went to the left, and my dad, and my brother, and myself to the right. I saw my mom and my sisters, they waved to me, I waved back, and I never saw them again. We continue marching, walking towards the infamous Dr. Mengele, better known as the Angel of Death, who was in charge of the selections. My father went first, and my brother, when it came my turn, he sort of hesitated, because I was nothing but a skinny little kid. But what saved me is the fact that my father worked in a clothing distribution center in the Lodz Ghetto, and he brought me this plaid coat with huge pads, and it made me look like a man. But I was nothing but a skinny kid, and after hesitation, he let me go through. We continue marching into this, towards the showers, which we were told to totally undress. Our heads were shaven, the underarms were disinfected. We went in to take the showers. After we took the showers, we were given a pair of striped pants and a shirt and a hat. When I came outside, I tried to find my father. I kept looking around, I couldn't find him. My father was standing right next to me. I didn't recognize my own father. This man aged 30 years in those few hours. He was only like 43 years old, because he realized where we found ourselves. I guess I was too young to comprehend where we were. How can one possibly describe Auschwitz? Auschwitz was a place where there were thousands of people brought in every single day from every corner of Europe, from as far as Greece and Romania and Hungary and Holland and Belgium and France and Poland and so on. And the selections were made. The elderly and the sick and the children were taken away into the gas chambers and crematoriums, and the able bodies were sent into the many temporary camps in Auschwitz, and eventually they were sent into the many hundreds of concentration camps in Germany and in Austria. Auschwitz was miles of concentration camp surrounded by high voltage electric wire, and every 50 or 60 yards there was a tower with an SS stormtrooper mounting a machine gun. Auschwitz had 4 huge crematoriums operating 24/7, and the smell and the stench of burning human flesh is so distinct that it cannot be confused with anything else. It's almost impossible to describe the conditions and the environment in Auschwitz. In addition of the infamous Dr. Mengele of joyfully sending thousands of people to their death, he was also in charge of the most heinous, sadistic, and brutal experiments performed in modern times, starting with partial and radical castrations. I bunked with 2 of them, Abraham Sachs and Alec Urbach, and I saw them. I can't even describe it. You should have seen the build on those men and the women. When we rode by the experiment block, I saw them. Their heads shaven, their faces grimaced with excruciating pain, walking on all 4s, not even the slightest resemblance to a human being. I'm not going to even mention the experiments on children. It's just too horrible. On the eve of Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, it's the holiest day for the Jewish people. My brother was already taken away and sent to a camp in northern Germany. When the SS stormtroopers came into our camp, and by the way, our camp was called the Zigeunerlager, which means the Gypsy Camp, because there were 35,000 Romas in this camp. And in order to make room for the men from the Lodz Ghetto, they were all taken into the gas chambers, crematoriums, and all killed. But the name still remained, and it was called the Zigeunerlager. And they came in that evening, and the Nazis were very well aware how holy that day was from the Jewish people, because there were always additional shootings or killings or hangings, some kinds of a punishment. And they demanded 700 teenagers. My sister's boyfriend, who had some privileges in this block, realized what was going on, and he grabbed me, threw me under his bunk, and covered me with a blanket. I said he had some privileges because he had his own bunk. We slept, there were 1,000 men in a block in Auschwitz. And we slept on the bare concrete. No pillows, no blankets, whatever, that's how we slept. And my father was not aware of what was going on, and in the morning, when this was over, he came over to me and he said, "Morris, we must get out of here, this is pure hell." And so as I was telling you, there were daily transports going all over Germany. We very quickly registered. We were taking it to the cattle cars. We were on our way into a concentration camp in Germany. Little did we know what was awaiting us. We came into a concentration camp called Kaufering. After a couple of weeks there, we were sent into another concentration camp called Kaufbeuren. These were satellites of Dachau. Kaufbeuren was considered by the German a Vernichtungslager, which means a camp of destruction. The original transport from Auschwitz to Kaufbeuren were 1,200 men. When we came into Kaufbeuren, there were only 500 left, and we were a group of 350. The conditions in Kaufbeuren are almost impossible to describe. My father and I were assigned, we woke up in the morning was night, was dark, and when we came back to the camp, it was dark. And we walked, I would say, maybe 3 or 4 miles into this huge campus, whatever, I don't know what it was, but anyway, we were assigned, my father and I were assigned to work with pick and shovel to dig foundations. It's hard for me even to imagine how my father or myself, but this is what we were told, and that's what we did. The SS stormtroopers didn't need an excuse to beat somebody of us up, and if somebody got a beating, they only lasted a day or two. There were anywhere between 30 and 40 people dying every single day. My father could no longer go to work, he was too weak. But when I would come back, and we used to bunk together in the same bunk, and he would tell me that he used to get beatings almost every single day. But there were no marks on his face or on his body. And he was telling me the reason that he was getting beaten up every day is because they wanted him to go into the sick block. And he knew the most anybody could last there was a day. I would not even attempt to describe the conditions there. It's beyond description. And so he was hoping he'd feel better and he'd be able to go back to work. One morning they came in and they dragged my father from the bunk, and I followed, and they took him into a shack. And I stood there in unbelievable horror, and they were pulling the teeth from his mouth. His body was still warm. You see, in those days in Europe, when a person needed a crown, it was made from gold. So that's what they killed him for. And to pay the final respect to my father, I volunteered for the burial commando, which nobody wanted to do. And the burial commando consisted of 4 men and a blanket, everybody holding on to one end. We put 5 or 6 bodies in there, and we walked outside, right outside of the camp. There was a huge pit. 2 of them let go, and the body just dropped into the pit. We repeated it 7 or 8 times until they were all buried. Then we just told to spread the chlorine to get ready for the next day. When I came back to the block, the Oberkörper, the man in charge, saw me and he says, "How come you didn't go to your regular work commando?" And I said, "I just finished the burial commando." He says, "I shouldn't have done it because they're short-handed, and for this I'm going to get 50 lashes on my behind." So they waited until everybody came back from the work. Everybody was ordered to gather and watch. Even the German camp commander came in, and they pulled me over the table and pulled down my pants, at which point the German commander, the SS Sturmführer, was a very high-ranking SS commander, he said, "No 25, only 25 because I'm a teenager." But the truth of the matter is that after the first few, you're numb and you hardly feel anything, but I still have the scars to prove it. After they were done, my friends dragged me into the bunk, and I must confess to you, for the very first time, I just lost my will to go on. And it was without a doubt the darkest point of my young life. But my friends got a hold of some rags and they soaked them in the snow, and they kept taking turn all night long to lay compresses, because they knew, and I knew, come morning, I have to go to work commando. And I did. I don't know how, but I did. About 10 days or so later, the orders came to liquidate the camp. Out of 1,550 men, we were 118 survived, and we were taken into the infamous Dachau. When we marched into Dachau, we were greeted by the welcoming committee, which consisted of 4 gallows with 4 men hanging there. As we walked through the infamous gate, which says Arbeit macht frei, which means work would set you free, we continued walking towards the showers which were joining the gas chambers in the crematorium. At that point, we already heard about the infamous cyclone gas that the Germans used. A can of about 39 cents killed almost 1,000 people. So we didn't know what to expect because these men were in pretty bad shape. Anyway, the water came out, and we were, after a few days, we were sent to another camp called Mildorf. In Mildorf, I worked at a quarry. I was assigned to work on a quarry, and I came down with dysentery, which is a terrible disease. It's almost, you can't keep anything down. All you want to really do is die. We were taken into the sick campus, which adjoining the labor camp. And after a few days, I was okay. Realizing nothing good would happen if I stay in this camp, I walked over to the stormtrooper and I asked him, I said, can I go back to the labor camp? I want to go back to work. He said he can't let me do it because they found typhoid and the camp was under quarantine. About 10 days later or so, we were told that we're going to be taken into a central typhoid camp in one of the conflict camps. When they threw us into the cattle car, and I looked around, these people around me were almost dead. And I really thought that this was the final hour for me. So I said the Shema, which is like the final prayer in Jewish faith, and I fell asleep from exhaustion. When I woke up in the morning, I looked through the cracks in the cattle car. There was a camp there. And I says, my good God, why would they keep these people alive when they killed hundreds of thousands of healthy people? I don't have an answer for that. That's the way it happened. And we were taken into this typhoid camp. By that time, it was already beginning of spring of 1945. And the orders came for the infamous death marches. You see, the infamous Adolf Eichmann had a plan, and he called it the final solution of the Jewish question. And the plan was given orders to all the concentration camps in Germany to march down south, the furthest point south on the German-Austrian border, outside of Mittenwald, to a forest called Tyrol, T-Y-R-O-L. And that's where we would be given soup, poisoned, and after a couple of days, by the time the American army would come in, there would be nothing left but a little mountain of ashes. But thank God that this plan didn't quite work. Being we were in a typhoid camp and these people couldn't stand up, let alone walk, we were put on, they ran out of cattle cars, so we were put on open coal cars, and we were on our way south into Germany, in Germany. After a couple of days, the train stopped. It was a village called Schwabhausen. I'll never forget it. And the reason it stopped because on the next track adjoining to, to us was a German, what they called a Flakzug, a train, a military train with huge anti-aircraft guns, the likes of which I never saw in my life. So obviously they were shielding themselves with us, hoping that the Americans would not come to disable the train, which they were trying to do, if they see us. But the Americans came, and rightfully so, because after all, they were shooting at them. And as hard as they tried, there were a lot of casualties. This was a huge train pulled and pushed by 8 huge locomotives. And so they were trying to disable this train, of course. to describe it's almost impossible. There were hundreds of people laying all over without arms, without legs, just bleeding to death. And it was in the afternoon, for whatever reason, the Germans, Nazis, the SS troopers had allowed us to go to the village for water. Because these people, a lot of them, had typhoid or just overcoming, and you're running very high temperature, and so we needed the water. So they allowed us to walk and go to the village for water. And it was in the afternoon that the skies turned black and the heavy rains came down. And the SS stormtroopers took shelter at the farmers' houses. So we just kept walking and walking. There were 5 of us that we stuck together in the camp until we walked into a German farmer who took us in, gave us food, and he hid us up in the hayloft. The next morning he woke us up and he thought that the war might be over because Munich was hung out the white flags to surrender. But it wasn't over. Anyway, one of our friends called Leipke was burning up with temperature. And he said he's not going to last too long if we don't give him some kind of help. And he told us that was a hospital, a convent, a cloister, converted to a hospital less than a mile away. If we take him, if we go there, they will help us. And that cloister was converted into a hospital for SS, for high-ranking SS officers. We made our way following the road. We got in the back of this huge, huge building. It must have been very, very late at night. And we were laying there in the forest. Being I was the youngest, I volunteered to knock on the door. I knocked on the door opened up, there was a nun. I didn't have to say anything. She said, "Come in, my child." And I told her there were 4 more friends in the forest. We all came in, we took our clothes off, which was saturated with lice. They burned it all. They gave us food, and the Bernard brothers came and they took us away to hit us. It was on April the 28th, 1945 in the morning, that they said, "Children, the American army is very close. There might be some shooting, so we'll be safer in the basement." They took us down to the basement. I got a hold of an apple cart. I looked out to the little window, and I saw the first American tank come up the hill. How can I describe to you the jubilation of my heart of knowing finally to be free? How can I possibly describe to you the jubilation, feeling that this nightmare was finally over? And now, 68 years later, and 4 generations strong, I stand before you a very proud and grateful man, grateful for the opportunity that this greatest country on earth gave me to start a new life, to raise a family, and to live in freedom and liberty.